thank you so much for taking out the time to join us to talk about defining and measuring system adoption success across your law firm. This is actually the first part of a series of webinars that we are running, and we see this as sort of a bigger picture. And we think that all of these webinars will give you practical tips and tricks, which all together help you really think about how to get more value from your business systems and how to create an always-on training engine in your law firm. As we go through the presentation further on, I will go mute and pop the link in the chat so that you can join for the future sessions as well. And we hope to see many of you on there as well. As for Harbour, hopefully when you registered, you know about us and what we do, but we work with law firms and corporate legal departments around the world to help them solve complex problems around technology, strategy, intelligence, etc. If you are interested in anything else that we do, then please let us know, and we are happy to have that conversation. But today I am joined by my colleague, John Attinger, and our special guest, John Grant, and I will let them introduce themselves and take the lead from here.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be with you all today. My name is John Grant. I'm a knowledge and innovation attorney at Paul Hastings. I started my career as a practicing attorney for about a dozen years, so I've certainly been on the other end of this conversation, having people trying to get me to change and adopt things. And then I spent the last 20 years and change on this side of the equation, working with both technology and knowledge management and really trying to drive change management at a lot of Am Law 50 law firms that I've worked at through the years. But I'm really excited to be on here with my other good friend, John, with an H, and to talk about a topic that I'm probably more interested in than I should be. It's just something very passionate about, because I think change and adoption is really where the value lies in all the innovation that we're trying to do in our business. So I look forward to the conversation.
Likewise, and now you know why we brought John in. I'm John Attinger with an H, Senior Director of Technology Adoption here at Harbour. I've been in law for about 25 years, first within law firms and then 3 very large international law firms, and then for the last 15 odd years on this side of the fence, helping law firms undertake various activities, always around the idea of training and change management. So I thought we would start by jumping right on in and asking the question, what is adoption? Before we can really launch a series around adoption, it probably would be a good idea for us to make sure that we all understand what we mean. So we thought we'd start by asking you, what does adoption actually mean to you? So Charlotte, if you could, I think we have a poll. Go ahead and type in whatever answer you'd like. To me, great adoption looks like, and this is a poll. You can type in whatever long text you want. What is it? What do you recognize when you see adoption? Or what don't you see? Or what do you see? Or what are you looking out for? John, what other ways can we prompt people to think about this? What does adoption look like to me?
You know, I think sometimes it's easy also to answer these questions in the negative. What isn't adoption is another way to think about it. You know, thinking back on those of us who've been in innovation and knowledge management for a long time, remember the days where everything was a counting stat, right? It's how many documents do we have under management? How many people have logged into this tool and all that kind of stuff. And while that can be very important information, I think we know adoption is more than just that. So if it's easier to answer in the negative, you know, what it doesn't look like. And since we're going to collect these for later, any war stories about when it went bad, those are always fun too.
Yep. We'll give people about another 15 seconds, and then we'll gather up those thoughts and read through them. Any of them jump out and bite you, Charlotte, as you're reading them?
No, not just yet. So I will pull everything up on the screen so that we can see them together. I can't see actually the answers in the back.
Okay.
So I am waiting in excitement with you.
Well, shall we do it now?
Yeah. I think we have over 50% of people who shared their answers. So I will end the poll now.
I think we would call that adoption of the poll. I think 50% of when people that's a good
Let's
adoption
set
of
the
the
bar a
poll.
little higher, John.
Oh. Are you able to see the results? Can you see the results, John?
I am not.
So let me read out some of the answers.
Here we go.
Okay.
Go ahead.
No, it's all yours.
No, I can't see the results, so go ahead.
So one of the answers we have is using and becoming more efficient with technology. User empowerment is another answer. Utilizing the new tools. Our people using the technology as it was intended to be used. Systems that we implemented and get used. People embrace the technology, ask questions, leverage it, and challenge it.
Interesting feedback. So what I think we will see from those results is that there tends to be a focus on using the software or using whatever the tool is that it is we're talking about. But it's also important for us to understand that adoption means different things to different people. So from the outset, because we're going to be talking about this over a period of 4 webinars, the purpose of this, or the focus of this session, is to talk about what does it really look like and how do we make that happen. So our next concept, what we're going to talk about here, is an idea that adoption happens when we bring a team together to proactively make it work. So it doesn't just happen because you want it to happen, and it doesn't just happen because you roll something out and make it available. And John will talk to this a little bit more in a minute, but we always base our projects, all of our thinking, on adoption around an idea called ADKAR, ADKAR. It's a model that has been set up by an organization called PROSCI, PROSCI, and we're going to delve into this a little deeper in another session. But the idea here is that in order for an individual to actually adopt something, they have to move through these different phases of awareness, being aware that something's happening. The desire is really wanting to embrace it. And that typically is where there can be a little bit of a downfall, meaning if a project is not going to thrive, it's probably because people don't see the value, and John definitely has something to say about that. Knowledge says people know what it means that they need to do. Ability means they can actually do it. And then reinforcement is, okay, now that we've rolled it out, now that they're using it, how do we make sure that they keep using it? So with that in mind, John, what is it that you tend to focus on, or what do you think is an important part of adoption when you're looking at projects?
Well, I think one thing, and this is what I like about ADKAR, is if you look at each of these attributes, they are bifold, right? They are highly personal. Like in the eyes of the person adopting the technology, it is their own awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement that's really going to deliver. So, when we're looking at a project for adoption, it's really focusing on the individual users. Their identity is what practice they're in, their prior experience with technology. All of these things are highly important and something that the change management professionals have to take into mind. But likewise, these are also organizational attributes.
100%.
What can we do as professionals driving this in our organization? What can we do to create a culture and an ethos in our organization where we're attentive to our awareness, our desire, and knowledge, and ability, and reinforcement? And I think when organizations don't balance those two things, you can't purely drive adoption organizationally in a law firm. At the end of the day, it really is about individual attorneys. but you also have to be attentive to building a culture where adoption of new technology is rewarded, where it's valued, where the leadership, even if maybe the leadership of the firm aren't the leadership when it comes to adopting new technology, but they create an environment where it's reinforced that organizationally, this is what we're going to be about. This is what we're going to talk to our clients about. This is the way we're going to practice law. So I think whenever you're entering a project, you really do have to focus on the individual values of the people you want to change and make sure you're creating an organization where you're rewarding the right kind of individual behavior and being very project focused, right? One of the problems we've run into when we're bringing new innovation into a law firm is, and probably into any organization, is those of us who are on the innovation end of things can often get very excited about the things that these new technologies do. But really, it's our ability to create that excitement in the individuals who've been using it that are really, really important. I mean, oftentimes I've been in front of a room talking about a new technology that I'm excited about, and you can't get anyone in the room to like lift their head up off the table, and you need to realize that there's a disconnect there. It's not just, maybe it's resistance to change. Maybe it's a lack of recognition that what you think is valuable to the individuals. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on as well.
Well, I think that jives with the concept that we discussed when we were preparing for this webinar, John, about currency, right? You use this term that you have to understand the currency of your audience. Can you explain what that means? Because I think that it fits right on in with what we're talking about here.
Yeah, anytime you're talking about adoption, what you're really talking about is the preamble to an ROI, right? In order to convince people to change, in order to convince people to recognize that they need to change, they really need to see the value in it. One thing's that the attorney population, and since we're talking about law firms and in-house legal, one thing that attorneys are really good at typically is determining what is the best use of their time. Time is literally that's their asset. That's what they make their living off of. So when you're going and you're asking people for their time to participate in change, to participate in adoption exercise, they really have to value it to participate. And I think one thing that's easy to get wrong is to not fully understand what I like to talk about, the currency of your audience. If you're in a room trying to sell a tool to lawyers on the premise that it's going to save them time, well, make sure with that group of lawyers, when they think about this thing, time is the thing that they value most. We know at the end of the day, ROI is money, right? What we invested in and what we got out of it. But different lawyers and different practices and different tools have their own currency. Sometimes a tool's currency is the clients love it. Now, yes, we know that eventually will lead hopefully to more fees and more money. But, I think of some collaboration software that we put in at a former law firm. It didn't always save time. It didn't always save money, but it created deep embedded, connections to our client that soon became a value proposition that would take us from job to job. And when I think about currency, I think back, when I was younger, traveling in Vietnam, and the hotel we stayed at, they changed money at the desk. And the big joke of the person working at the desk is you'd hand him $2 US, and he would lean back and throw his arms up and, "Sir, you are now a millionaire," and would hand you back a million Vietnamese dong for your $200. And sometimes I feel like that when I'm talking to lawyers, if I don't get the currency right, I'm in the front of room congratulating them on being millionaires, and all they're thinking about is, dude, I just gave you $200 and you gave me the equivalent back. So we have to think about when we get excited about the value of something, that value is translating to the needs of our audience.
Yep, I can understand that. Now, let's take this one step further and ask the question for the audience. Why should I care about adoption? Why should you care about adoption? Those folks who are on the call here. And I think, John, there's two ways that we need to think about this. One way is from the perspective of the firm. The other way is from the perspective of the individual. So why don't you start by talking about the firm? Why should the firm care? Why should that matter to them? And then I'll bring it home with the why should the folks on the call care, and why should the folks who are in the training and adoption and change area care?
Yeah, why the firm should care in the law is always an easy answer, right? The firm should care because the clients care, and especially when you talk about new technology and legal, if you go back not even that many years, those of us who are working innovation, you would be bringing up technology and talking about technology that really was just common knowledge of people who worked in innovation and tech. But now you look at what's happening in legal innovation, go to your LinkedIn and look, it's everywhere. You know, people are talking about AI, people are talking about new tools. Our partners are reading that, our clients are reading that. So it's really important for a firm to be able to make some clear statements about their innovation strategy and how they are going to keep up with the market, how they're going to serve the needs of their clients. And embedded in that strategy needs to be, how are we going to make sure that we self-realize what we're telling our clients we're doing? That's what's really important for the firm, because the clients will figure it out. There's never been a time where people are more dangerously educated about legal technology than they are now, whether they're in it or not. And we have a responsibility as those stakeholders and new ideas and stakeholders in adoption to make sure that we keep our organizations honest and also on track. And, you know, we work very hard at that at Paul Hastings. It's not always about, you know, oh, this other firm did that, let's chase it. You know, that's not a great way to think about your firm strategy, but to really think about how can we become the firm our clients will value us as and want us to be, not just today, but in the future. And for the individual, the value proposition is once you, and this is that ADKAR thing again about the two layers of the organization, the individual, how can I make sure I'm an attorney that's best serving the needs of that organization? You know, attorneys and partners do get a rap of being very individualistic, even though in a firm, and there are aspects of the business that drive that. But innovation, to really get leverage and to really impact the client experience, has to be something that's adopted as a group. So, you know, organizations need to make sure they're rewarding behavior where the individual is showing that they are rowing on the boat that's headed in that strategic direction of innovation.
Right. And that ties in with what I'm going to talk about, which is the advantages of this, of embracing adoption and making that a focus. And I think in many instances, it's not something that the training community has thought about. Change community, probably yes, but the training community, not necessarily as much. Historically, if I look back when I was training, and this again was 15 years ago, it was more of a reactive type of a process. When you, as a trainer or someone in the training side of an organization, focus on adoption, what you're actually doing is elevating your role above a reactive trainer to becoming more of a proactive business partner. And because, as John mentioned, there are a number of reasons that a firm cares about this and that the attorneys in the partnership cares about this: client requirements, firm policies, IG risk requirements, all these process efficiencies that are supposed to happen when the technology that the firm has identified is adopted and used, that if you become a part of that solution, you become something that is a valued net positive to the ROI, and it changes the whole way that the firm looks at you as a trainer in the training department. And the final note I would add on this is, as change continues to accelerate, you talked about how prolific it is on LinkedIn. Well, it's as prolific in law firms and legal departments. And we all know that this AI dragon is coming into view. There's going to be a lot of adoption that has to take place for AI to work successfully. And that's going to be an example where we really have to focus on looking at how this technology can be adopted within different practice groups in different ways. There is no way that that's going to be a one size fits all. So the more you can get adoption going now, the more these processes and these procedures we're going to share with you in the next 30 minutes are in place, the easier it is to do that. So I thought we would like to hear from you about your experience with adoption at your organization. Charlotte, I think it's time for another poll. What is the level of leadership interest in adoption at your firm? And this is on a scale. I'm assuming, Charlotte, 0 is no interest and 10 is the ultimate in interest.
Yeah, that's correct.
Although, John, this is a bit of a trick question, and I'm very proud to work at a firm where this isn't a problem, but I have been places where, when you're really thinking about their interest in adoption, make sure you're not judging them just on their words, but also judging them on their actions and their investments. I don't think you will find leadership too many places that don't talk about directionally wanting to do these things. And this is, I think, part where if you're in a role in your firm that's a leadership role in adoption and training, some of the stuff we're talking about on this webinar may not be a natural bit of information to people in other kinds of leadership, and that we really have a role to play in our organizations to helping our leadership, the partners understand, what adoption really is beyond just a word. Because I think there's a lot of people who think they're experiencing success, but maybe don't realize where the gaps are. And you can see the difference in organizations where leadership really understands what adoption is, as opposed to them just thinking, oh, we seem to be doing okay there. People are logging in and using it. So it's a bit of a loaded question.
I have seen examples which I think are going in the right direction, where part of an adoption rollout program involves all of the leadership in the organization not only using it, but insisting that other folks use it as well. So, for example, when a DMS was rolled out at a firm recently that we were working with, all the firm leadership had a mandate starting Monday. All documents had to be sent through the iManage, whether it was a link, whether it was a document. They all had to be saved that way. And if you're the leaders saying that this is what has to be done, bang, you're setting the policies and people have to follow them. Exactly. All right. How about we end the poll and share the results?
Hopefully you can see that now.
Yes, we can. So we've got a combination of folks. Well, we've got some 10s there. That's fantastic. Hovering around the 5 to the 10 points, 1 down at the 3. So it is a spectrum from low to incredibly high. Interesting to hear you say that. Now, again, one of the things I guess take away from this is that in your organization being put into practice, or is that something that they're just talking about? Now I'm going to.
And I think the spread there is not surprising. I think 5 to 8 is probably a good, honest assessment at a lot of places. And it can change depending on the project as well, right? There are things that get a lot of attention and press, and there are things that are necessary, but no one likes the next rollout of some regular firm technology, but something more exciting and sexy, of course, they enjoy. But that felt like a good, honest answer.
So next discussion point is, all right, we've understood what is adoption. We've talked about what it means and how one could start to build the idea around it. Now let's look at how we can actually build a team to make adoption happen. I'm going to stop that and move on to the next slide. So for an adoption program to take place, there's really 4 key roles that you want to be looking at. A sponsor, who really is the forward face of the project. They provide the overall ultimate approval. They assign the resources and the visions, and they're also often the person who's really speaking from authority within the organization to their peers. You also want to develop what are called project champions, and this is a team of folks that will be inspirational and motivational to their peers. So think about this on the practice group level, or on the physical office location level, or maybe even the floor within a building level. But these are the people who are going to really motivate other people and get excited about it. And you often will bring them in early into the project and get them engaged as the product is being developed, so that they can give their feedback, and they value that extra attention and ability to speak on behalf of their peers. And then when it comes time to rolling out, they're the ones who, hey, I know that John Grant over here is an expert on this DMS. I'm going to go ask him a question, or maybe I'm going to see if he has an idea about how to do this. And they become like the extended help desk as well once you go live, and through thereafter with the reinforcement. Clearly, you're going to have some change manager or change managers. And those are the folks who are going to be looking at all of the activities that are needed to get people to move across that ADKAR spectrum, from the awareness to the desire to the knowledge. And then obviously there's a project manager who's going to focus on the day-to-day activities. And they're the ones that are sort of going to be looking at the project plan and making sure that different people are doing the right things at the right times. So this is a whole team that you want to establish and build around the idea of adoption. Now, ideally, you would keep some of the core players together, and they would be able to stay from project to project to project. So you have some institutional knowledge and credibility. The sponsor will probably change, because that person from whom that really top level authority and message needs to come from might be finance in one group for one project. Maybe it's legal for another, or IT for another, or risk for a third. So the project sponsor often changes, but ideally you'd have the same champions, change managers, and project managers, so that you can get into a flow. And then your goal as an adoption team really is to coach and help that project sponsor in the leading role that they have. John, any thoughts about this team that we assemble and how they work?
I'd love to share some and some best practice here too. First of all, you can't underemphasize the importance of the change managers, right, on these. And we're really lucky to have a great team of professionals at Paul Hastings who do that, because I feel that there's some real discipline to the way things are communicated and the way adoption is structured that they're pros at, and it's great. What really empowers those people, though, is to embed with them people, and this is, what my role. So I'm the innovation and knowledge attorney for M&A, private equity, and tax here at the firm. 3 areas that I practice extensively in. So having people that have that dual discipline of really being able to relate to the practicing attorneys and understand their workflow and their work, who's also embedded with the change managers and such, can really create a lot of inertia. It can be not that our change management people don't have the ability to establish credibility on their own, but sometimes you can shorten the amount of time it takes to get people on board when they recognize that there's not just technology experts there, but experts in the way that they practice. Another best practice, those 2 people on the far left should also definitely be a part of whatever your assessment team is, not just your adoption team. If you have people who you're really expecting to be champions and really hoping to be project sponsors, having them involved in looking at what the things are we're going to adopt as a firm gives them buy-in to the process. So when they're talking about we're going to adopt this, when they can be in front of the room and said, hey, we knew we needed to solve this problem. We worked with our innovation professionals, the firm, to look at several options in the marketplace. We picked one, we had it customized for some needs of the firm, and this is what we're offering you. That's a really powerful message. No attorney who's in this adoption process wants to feel like they're the experiment and they're the beta, unless they volunteered to be the experiment or the beta, because you do need people to pilot things on the assessment phase. We have a group of lawyers here at Paul Hastings that it's called Innovate IT, or as we call it, Innovate It, who are people who are signed on. And this is a group that regularly meets to, participate in proof of concepts. So to the extent you can involve the people you hope to be your champions in that assessment process, the more able they're going to be to perform their roles. It's very powerful.
It's very powerful. I was on a panel recently in a webinar where that was this strong message that came from one of the partners at a law firm, who said, there are members of my peer group who are very eager to participate and figure out what technology works and what technology doesn't. And when we come into that conversation, we're not doing this because we're trying to undercut it. We're doing it because we want to make sure that it's the right solution for us. So his number one message was, do not come to us with a decision made. Come to us to help make that decision collaboratively. And then you're going to have me fighting like hell against those people who are bad mouthing it, because I know it works and I know it should be the one we use.
Yeah, absolutely.
Moving on. So you've got your team together. You've pulled these folks together. I do want to point out, I think John referenced the idea of those folks on the left also being a part of the assessment group. Think about also the fact that strategically there's kind of two main areas that make adoption happen. One is the awareness, and the second is the desire, right? We can take care of the training, we can take care of all those things. If people are aware of it and they want to do it, then you're halfway down the field, maybe 3/4. The awareness really comes from the sponsor, and the desire really comes from the practice group or the managerial level, right? So the sponsor will make people aware of what's going on, but it's those inter-practice group managerial conversations where that kibutzing is going on, if you will, that connecting and talking back and forth around what's happening and why it's happening. So don't just depend on your sponsor and think that this person is going to be the one to say it and it shall happen like a magic wand. You need to invest some time in those lower level practice group, departmental managerial levels, bring them into the fold and have them be your champions and your spearhead, because that's where the actual convincing happens. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think so. And I would even add is when you look at, who are the right people for these roles is important too. We learn with anything, just plugging people in is not always the best. And I think what I really like to think about is successful adoption at its core is the product of great storytelling. And you think about it, a skill that attorneys have, what makes attorneys good at their jobs, especially litigators, is they're incredible storytellers. They're very good at it. So if we're trying to change that population, I think it's important for those of us in the adoption roles to also be good storytellers. And you figure this over time. If you've ever been in a firm that adopted something really cool that got use and really became elemental to that firm, those tools almost develop their own folklore. Like people know it's like, yeah, we used this tool or that tool, and the client loved it and did this, and we saved all this time, we drove profit margin. So when you're in this early stage, you need to be the people who create that story, who offer that proof. Don't tell someone, oh, we like this tool because it's going to help your workflow. No, tell a story about the workflow and then emphasize where that tool impacted it. So don't just put people in those roles, but make sure that the people in those roles are going to be effective storytellers at driving adoption.
And there's an advantage too in bringing them in early, because if you get those folks in early who can work through it and figure out where it works, then you can leverage those stories as what I call from the trenches.
Yep.
To market it to the wider audience afterwards. And then it's not me, John, the trainer, talking about something. It's John, the partner in the tax group, who says that this works for him, and bang, that's a much more convincing sell.
Yeah.
So you've got your team together, you've found the right people for these various different roles. And again, we focus on doing this with our clients. So if you want any help with any aspect of this, please feel free to call my team. That's what we do, is we help work people through these various processes. But the next thing that you're going to want to undertake is what we call an adoption success assessment. And an adoption success assessment really looks at the organization as a whole and says, are we ready for these changes? Are we ready? Do we have the right things in place? Is the ground fertile to grow, or is it trying to grow on rocks that won't allow for things to sprout? So there's 5 key questions. What's going to change? Who will sponsor the change? Who will have to change? Who will lead, manage, or supervise these people? And how much change will there be? And part of answering these questions, we've gone in and worked with a number of clients where we will interview stakeholders, look at the amount of change that's taking place, identify how has change happened in the past. Was it well received or was it resisted? Do we have the right people? To John's point, do we have the right sponsor with the right personality and the right type of characteristics to lead this? We've worked in projects before where the person who was probably the most qualified to be the sponsor from a technical perspective was absolutely not the right person to be the sponsor outward facing to the organization. So we had to find somebody else because they didn't have the right chemistry and they were camera shy and all those other different things. So part of this adoption success assessment gives you an understanding, an output that says, here's where we have strengths, here's where we have challenges, and here's what we need to do to address those challenges so that we can make sure that the likelihood for success and adoption is as high as it possibly can be. So what are you going to do to implement the change? Once you've got that adoption success assessment done, once you've got those questions answered and identified where the issues are going to be, then you have to build yourself an actual change plan with the goal in the end of obviously all of those different possible A, D, K, A, Rs lining up so that you actually implement the change and then the adoption follows through. But don't think that adoption is just going to happen. It's something that you actually have to keep an eye on. You have to take a pulse of what's going on. So the next point that we want to talk about is how can we actually measure the adoption? And that says we've taken all this effort to make sure we've got all the cards stacked in our favor. And now we roll out the software, or now we put into place some policy. How can we measure what the adoption is and whether that's actually whether we're getting what we wanted out of it? And I know, John, you have some thoughts about this in terms of where this lies on the easy versus hard spectrum.
Well, it's both. Right? I mean, there are aspects of adoption that are easy to track. And I know, John, you're going to talk about, your group can visually kind of track what's going on with this is a great one. I like this slide. But sort of that higher level of adoption is a little bit hard. That line between hard data is great. We can know who's using it, how often they've used it, how often they've opened it, and stuff like that. But to be successful, I think that hard data is great to identify gaps, places you may have missed, populations that may not be adopting, but you can't stop there. You have to use that to then go out and gather what I would call anecdotal data of actual use cases, of actual value, of actual delivery, because at the end of the day, you'll want that in your report when you're going and saying to your managing partner, yeah, remember that thing we spent $250,000 on because I asked for it? Here's what's happened. Here's how it's impact our people. Here's how it's impact our clients. And you're not always going to be, with most of these tools, you're not going to say we spent $250, but we made $500. Right? That, a lot of these tools don't lend themselves to that kind of analysis. So you really have, and it's also good going into a project, if you've established some ROI expectations with those people you will need to justify the expense to, let them know on the front end, this is a hard conversation because they want to see two numbers. Say, listen, I believe in what we're doing. Here's the impact I think it'll have. We will be able to put some quantitative dollar measures on some specific projects, perhaps, but I think a lot of the value we're going to be able to demonstrate will be demonstrated in different ways, and kind of know that going in. But why don't you then transition and talk about some of the tools and some of your thoughts, John, and I'll you can put some frosting on this cake.
Thank you, John. Yeah, and I think what you're hitting on too is there's a term that we use in the training community called ROE. So ROI is return on investment. ROE is return on expectations. And so if we set up the right expectations beforehand, then there isn't this disconnect afterwards where they feel like they were promised something and something else was delivered. So yes, we do have some ways to talk about measurement, but we'd love to find out what tools are in place at your organization to measure the adoption at your firm. Are there any tools in place that you have to measure adoption at your organization? So you might be thinking about this from the perspective of, yes, we measure adoption with robust data across a number of different applications within our stack. That would be at one extreme. Next down, you might say we have some insight into adoption with some of our applications, but not all of them. Farther down, you might say we have a sense of the level of adoption, but we really don't have any supporting data for it. And then the last one would be, well, we haven't really focused on adoption yet. So tell us what you think, what kind of level of adoption you have at your organization, and more specifically, how are you gathering that data? How are you knowing that there's adoption going on other than just kind of putting your finger up and looking which way the wind is blowing? I'm curious, John, in your case at Paul Hastings, I know you just started there, but do you have a sense that there's some kind of measurement going on there? Has that something that you've come across yet?
Absolutely, and there's all kinds of real measures they take, but I go back to my role in the fact that our lawyers have partners in this journey. So I have colleagues who are also in my role in other departments and other practice groups who are really on the front line. So adoption is not just a long line on a graph to us here. It's really in the moment and collaborating with our attorneys all the time. We're very lucky to have people in roles where adoption doesn't stop at the session, that we actually travel that adoption journey with our attorneys. We work with them in using the tools. We work with them on client engagements. And so one of the ways that we can measure adoption is simply by how busy and participatory we are in the work that's being done. And maybe that's a luxury that some of your firms may not have. But when you can have people who are on the entire journey and not just at the beginning and then at the end trying to figure out where the ship ended up, that's awfully valuable, and I'm proud to be someplace we're able to do that.
Charlotte, what do we find? Do we have the results?
Wonderful now.
I will share the results.
So we've got some people measuring adoption by using feedback surveys.
Okay.
With users. We've got usage data and surveys from someone else. We have a sense of adoption, but have no data to support our thoughts.
Got it. So it runs the spectrum.
Yeah.
So let's round out and head home on the last area, which is how can you actually measure the adoption? And there's a number of different ways that you can do it. Clearly, the first one is help desk tickets. Contradictorily, or against what you might think, having a lot of help desk tickets about an application isn't necessarily a bad thing. It means that training needs to happen, but it certainly means that there's adoption going on. So if you've done a campaign and you've rolled out a software, or you've emphasized something or done a skill up program, and now suddenly there's a bunch of tickets around something, boom, you know that people are using it because they're asking questions where they might not have before. So use those help desk tickets as a way of getting information about what's being used.
You can actually go a step further, John. Not only are they using it, they see enough value that when it isn't working optimally for them, they're asking for help and not just binning it.
Yep.
Because
that's a very good point.
We've all worked with stuff where we've all worked with tools where we probably should have sent a help desk ticket, but instead we shut it down and never opened it again.
Yes.
So
right.
It says quite a bit actually that they're willing to learn, and they want it to work the way they want it to work.
Indeed. You can also ask your in-house applications team. They may have some visibility into the back of the system to see what's being done on an application level. You can certainly reach out to the software vendors to find out if they are able to report on things. Often with some of these cloud applications, that information is a little bit more difficult to get a hold of. So you might need to connect with the vendors to see what's happening. I'm going to spend a minute talking about something called the Harbor Utilization and Adoption Dashboard, and that gives you some real valid insight into what's happening. But then also you can talk. I would recommend, and I know John's a strong advocate as well, of just talking with some people to find out. identify key people in the practice groups at various different roles, partners, associates, secretaries, paralegals, that can give you some information about what they are doing and what they're not doing. As long as you're open and upfront and saying, we're doing this to find out what's being used and not in any punitive way, then get them to tell you what they and their peers are using.
And this goes back to what we talked about at the beginning, John. Adoption is very personal.
It is.
And so don't be afraid to have, now we all need to value the time of the people we're working with. But at the same time, I don't think, and surveys are great and you can use them, but I don't, being very self-serving to the people on this call, I don't know anyone in this part of the business who's ever built their career by writing good surveys.
No.
They built their career by getting in the trenches with the attorneys, building personal relationships and having personal conversations. It will pay off in the end.
Agree 100%. The idea behind the utilization and adoption dashboard is it brings together the information that you're looking to collate from the back end and from the back office for various different applications. It works through APIs. And the idea is that we go into the adoption program looking to figure out what it is that's being done by various different people in various different applications. Once those parameters are set out, and we say how many email messages are being saved into the DMS, or how many attachments are being added to an email, or whatever it may be, how much time is being released at whatever period in the month. Is it all being weighted to the last day, or is it being done on a weekly basis? Then the dashboard pulls that information from the various apps through APIs, and what you get is a breakdown by practice group or job title or region, or however you want to set it up, where you can see what is being done by whom to what level, and that you can compare against what your goals were for the beginning when you set out at the beginning to increase adoption from this to this in this application amongst this group of people. So it's a very useful tool, very helpful in that it allows you to bring it all together in one place instead of having to go all over the place to find it. And we're happy to work with you to set this up in your organization and give you that insight that you might not have otherwise. And that,
I think it's important here too, that you're looking at the results, John, and we had talked about this preparing for this meeting and talking about the importance of reinforcement. Also realize that adoption is never measured in a moment. You know, moments can tell you if you're on the right path, but adoption is a journey. And adoption, let's be honest, you adopt a tool is used, it may at some point involve a decision to wind down and, you know, use another tool. And this day-to-day data can be really valuable for that. But I think I've had two separate people tell me basically the same thing. It says a lot, is even if your numbers are good here, never stop selling what it is we want them to adopt. Never stop talking about it. Never assume adoption is done. People forget. I had a global managing partner at one of the largest firms in the world tell me, John, I'll tell you the secret of communicating with partners. It says you tell them something, then you tell them again, then you tell them again, then you tell them again. And he would, because he thought he was funny, he went on for a ridiculous amount of time. One of my colleagues here that I work with currently actually put a number on it and said, you got to tell them 7 times somehow through some communication. So make sure there are people on your adoption team who aren't just facilitating the process of adoption, but are facilitating the continuing feedback loop and the continuous improvement in making sure that it pays off over time. Because we've all seen spikes, right? And sometimes you do a big rollout, you do a big training, you look at your dashboard, you talk to a few people, everyone's chuffed, like this is awesome. And then all of your team moves on to another project.
Yeah.
And because you're not connected to the data and connected to the practice group, that usage can decline. And that says a lot. Successful adoption isn't how many people open something the week after they were trained on it. It's, are they still going back? You know, you can have 1 or 2 good dates with almost anybody if you have a sense of humor. But man, if you're going to go for that 4th, 5th, or 6th, that means you actually see value in the relationship. That's the way people relate to technology too.
And you raise an interesting point there, that from our perspective as the person or the people who are pulling this program together, you talked about the fact that we focused all this effort on adoption and then we have to move on to another project. Inevitably, there's another project, right? Because nothing sits still. So I think the thought I'd like to leave everybody with is, in order for you to be able to continue to reinforce or to maintain that adoption level, you need to start looking at ways to decentralize the learning and decentralize that information gathering. If you're always the one doing it, then you can imagine you've got an X amount of work for this project, and then the next one comes along and you've got the last one plus this one, and it soon becomes untenable. So what you need to look at is finding ways to decentralize or automate the learning and the support. And that's what we're going to cover in the second webinar, where we're going to talk about some of the tools and processes that we recommend, like the Pathfinder or a Champions. The Pathfinder allows individuals to define what they need to know, and then they can get the learning without the trainer having to be involved at all. The Champions program we've talked about, where you're decentralizing and democratizing the learning and education and support throughout the different groups, so it isn't just you and the training group. Then how you could perhaps incorporate both of those into a skill up program. And then lastly, we're going to talk about a managed training service where perhaps the Harbor team of trainers can offload some of that recurring training that you have to do over and over again every week for the new hires, which saps about 50% of your bandwidth, and allow you to focus on some of those, what we call higher value or higher ROI training projects, like the ones where you're getting deep into a practice group, finding out what they need, and then helping to solve their problems. And that webinar is going to be on July 18th. And with that, anything that we want to close it out with, Charlotte?
I was going to throw in just a couple of questions that came in
Please.
throughout the session for the last 5 minutes, if you're happy with that.
Yes.
So we have a question about how people often worry that their role is being diluted or made redundant by new technology. How important is it to communicate early on what the vision is for what the firm will look like and what people's jobs will look like after the change has been made?
Well, that is about the deepest question I think I've heard in about 6 months. John, do you have any thoughts? I certainly do.
Yeah, I think, and there's a lot of cliches that come around this, right? It's like you won't be replaced by technology, but you might be replaced by someone who uses technology better than you. We're swimming in this ocean. You can't climb out of it. This environment that we're in, where we're bringing in new technologies that are creating efficiencies, that's just, that's what we're in right now. We're not going to get out of it. I think organizationally, believe it or not, I've worked for a few different big law firms. I can think of almost no examples where the intent of any technology was to reduce headcount. Certainly, they want to reduce costs. Sometimes as efficiencies are gained, there may be those who are left on board and those who are not. But I think it's just very important to get good messaging from leadership that we're looking to streamline some activities. And to me, the selling point is, if someone thinks they can replace you with a technology, then it's time to really upskill your value to the law firm to make sure that you can't be. Right. And I think as law firms evolve, we will see that happen. But and again, there's a lot left. A lot more needed in that answer than what I gave, because it is a deep and difficult question. But I think organizations just need to really be reflective of, we want our people to get better. We believe technology will facilitate that. And when that fear arises, it should motivate you to figure out other value propositions for your role. Easier said than done, but I think that's where we're at. John, I'd love to hear your answer.
And I would dovetail that with, get your training group involved in this. So as long as the message that's coming from firm leadership is, this is what's being proposed, and we are here to help you make that transition, and our goal is to skill you up so that you can better serve not only the firm but the clients, then you allay quite a lot of that concern, which, as John referred to, as people think it's just trying to cull the deadwood. No. We're here to help you adopt this technology, and that is our goal. And as long as you make that very clear from the beginning, and you walk the walk, not just talk the talk, but you actually put in place that kind of support. I think that goes a long way to allaying people's fears.
And let me add this caveat. If you ever put an image in a PowerPoint of a robot sitting in front of a computer, you should be fired on the spot, not anybody else. So don't be careful when in your cleverness you only fuel the fear. That was early on in the AI discussion. Those images were very prominent. I think people have realized how unhelpful and inaccurate they are.
So another one we've got here is whether you could share a couple of good tips for keeping everyone on a message and ensuring that the sponsors, the champions, the project managers, change managers, or consultants who might be helping them all tell the same story and don't fall victim for crosstalk that dilutes the core message of what's being done and why it's being done.
Well, that's an excellent question as well. And I think that goes back to assembling the right team with the right type of personalities and characteristics. But it also, I think, I made the point early on that there is a really good value in having a core change and adoption team that moves from one project to another. So you aren't reinventing the wheel every single time you do this. Yeah, you're going to make mistakes when you do this. We all make mistakes every time we do something new. So if you're starting this, expect to make some mistakes, but then you learn from it. And I think the challenge that this question asks is, how do you get everybody on board so that they all see the same vision of where we want to go? And that speaks to a lot of work communicating to the various people who are in this project what it is you're doing, why you're doing it, and what is it that we hope to benefit out of this. Would you agree, John?
Yeah, have frequent actual conversations. If the main way your adoption team is communicating with each other is through recurring circulating emails, I can promise you you're not all on the same page. Have frequent, short, honest conversations so you can kind of track the mood, track the messaging, track the feedback, and stay active and be prepared to tact. You know, if you got to take a new direction, do that. But it is possible to lose the message, and the people you're selling to will recognize inconsistency in the message and never interpret that as a good thing. So it's important to all be on the same page.
Right.
And I think that's a fantastic note to finish on, just on time. Thank you so much for everyone for your time and for joining us.